If we define augmented reality as simply the combination of physical and digital worlds, then I think you could argue that the first major experiment in AR for journalism was the infamous QCat, circa 2000. The device that allowed users to scan a barcode in publications like Fortune, Wired, the Dallas Morning News, and get contextual information related to what they were scanning on the internet. Of course, it required having this ridiculous-looking device in the first place, reading the print publication while seated next to your desktop computer, and then, frankly, when you did all of that, the information you got wasn't particularly worth the trouble you'd gone through. Flash forward another decade, we see further experiments in AR for news. This one from Esquire, they put a QR code on their cover, and all of a sudden Robert Downey Jr. is coming to life, though again, in front of your desktop computer and in a somewhat implausible scenario. Kind of a cooler, more interesting experiment, which the Rolex ad right there in the back sort of explains what was going on or why, what might have motivated that particular experiment, but not particularly practical nor particularly useful to the user. Flash forward another decade to today, and AR seems to be having yet another moment. We see a slew of AR apps come out in the last 6 to 12 months, and I'm here to argue that this time, the third go-around for AR is for real. So before we go any further, it seems necessary to just define some terms, explain what I'm even talking about in the first place. It helps to draw a spectrum. So you've got a real environment on the left and an entirely virtual environment on the right. As Deborah was explaining, some people just use the term mixed reality to speak to everything in between the two poles. But closer to the right side of the spectrum is what we typically refer to as virtual reality, and those are the extremely immersive, amazing experiences that require, again, putting on a fairly inaccessible piece of equipment to view. Toward the left side is AR, and though the experiences often fall short of what's possible further to the right of on this spectrum, experiencing it merely requires the phone that's already in your pocket. And that, in a nutshell, explains what I believe is like the real potential here and why this is the moment for AR in our industry and in others. It's really a confluence of three trends happening at the same time right now. So one is a transformation in how people communicate, from entirely text-based communication to one that's dominated by visuals, and not just any visuals, but ones that the users are really comfortable manipulating themselves. So I don't think people particularly think of Snapchat and Instagram lenses as AR, but that's exactly what they are. And I think at their core, those two apps and a lot of other messaging experiences are fundamentally AR apps being used in entirely mainstream ways. Second major trend is just advances just in the last 2 or 3 years in how computers see and are able to find planes and depth information on a flat image, sort of transforming what 2D experiences into 3D. That wasn't possible just 2 or 3 years ago. All of a sudden is very much possible and in most of the phones we have. And then the last is what I was saying earlier, that all of this technology has been bundled up and available now in most phones running iOS and Android. It really is this confluence of events in the last 6 to 9 months that have led to this moment for AR. It was kicked off in June of last year when Apple announced a new toolkit for developers in iOS 11 that suddenly made it way easier to create AR experiences in apps. Google followed quickly with their version of essentially the same thing. It's in Android 7, which is already in most high-end Android phones, like coming soon to all Android phones. And between those two, you've got nearly 100% penetration of smartphones suddenly capable of really full-scale AR experiences in a way that wasn't possible before. And that helps explain why in quick succession, all of the major technology companies have released their version of an AR studio, allowing developers, creators to make AR experiences for those tech companies' own apps. At Quartz, we've always had a sort of hobbyist level interest in things like 3D modeling, 3D printing, 3D scanning, but it was just this kind of thing we did in the office for fun, not something that really applied to our journalism. With the release of ARKit, it seemed like an opportunity to meld that hobbyist level interest with the journalism we were doing. And you may know that we have had for 2 years an app for iOS and Android that tells the news in a conversational interface through a mix of text, emoji, GIFs, and static images. So the idea we had was, what if we just thought of 3D models as yet another media type that we could put into the mix of our storytelling when it seemed appropriate. So for instance, when SpaceX had the inaugural launch of the Falcon Heavy, we were able to obtain a 3D model of the spacecraft itself. And it's the kind of story where you could try explaining in text to the reader, to the user, what's so special about the spacecraft. You could show the user a photograph of the spacecraft, or you could give the object itself to the user and let them place it in their physical environment, manipulate the object, literally walk around the object, and get just a far more helpful and explanatory experience of what's going on here, what's so different and cool about this particular spacecraft relative to others, for instance. So we don't do this every day, not even every week, and not in fact, most news items don't particularly lend themselves to being presented as a 3D model in an AR experience. But we found that some really do. So space does tend to be a theme here. This is the Cassini spacecraft that had orbited Saturn for several decades and was coming to the end of its run. You let the users take a look at the spacecraft, see what it looks like at actual size, walk around it, have a real experience with the object. When the Rosetta Stone was suddenly back in the news because of a new research report, I let people place it directly on their desk. And the Berlin Wall, a news item we'd done about that, and this is perhaps my favorite example we've done because it really sort of it explains why you might actually want to see something in 3D as opposed to a flat 2D image where you're able to see both sides of the wall. And because this is such an amazing high-resolution scan of the wall, even just going up right into the nooks and crannies of it, gives you a view of the object that you wouldn't be able to get any other way. Some of the design challenges we faced when presenting this is not something that users are comfortable or used to finding in their apps today. So one challenge was simply how to explain what the hell was going on. Do we call it AR? Do we call it 3D? What sort of icon would explain that when you tap this, something else is going to happen, and as a user, you're going to have to be doing you're going to take some actions in order to manipulate the object. We settled on the call to action, explore it in AR, to sort of suggest that the user would be in control and have more of an experience rather than just viewing an object. We also had to explain what the user needed to do, because they all of a sudden need to place the object in their environment, and placing something in AR requires finding like a flat surface. You can be holding the phone in the wrong way. We don't want this to all of a sudden feel like a laborious experience, but a fun one, because that the wow factor of AR sort of quickly wears off if you're just struggling to place the object in the first place, or don't have enough light in your environment to place the object at all. We also found that a really helpful affordance was to put the object in a translucent sort of ghost mode, hovering over where you might be placing it before you actually tapped to place the object. It helps the user figure out what exactly is going on and not lose their place when they're trying to view their actual reality in front of them, and then this augmented reality on the screen in their hand. We went through a whole host of options for what the actual AR viewer itself should look like. There's all sorts of things you can do once you've placed the object, but what we found was actually the better approach was to do as little as possible, or put as little as possible on the screen itself, and let the object shine above all. This was the first version that we shipped, and then a later version actually tried to strip away even more functionality. Although we did add one thing, you see in the bottom right-hand corner, a screenshot tool, because what we found even before that tool existed was that it turns out this is sort of an instinctually shareable experience. And so as we place these objects in the app, people would place them in unusual places where they were around the world, take a screenshot, share it on social media. This is a Tesla Model 3. You can't get one as they've rolled off the factory floor, but you can get one in the Quartz app. This is the Tesla in the Auckland airport. This is a Chevy Bolt owner. That's an actual Chevy Bolt in their driveway in the back, trying to test what another electric vehicle in the driveway would look like. We did a great story on the 808. There's the Rosetta Stone again, and this is that slice of the Berlin Wall, this time in Copenhagen. People asked for an archive, and so we gave it to them. Everything else in the app is ephemeral, but it did seem like the nature of these objects and the timeless nature of the news stories they were attached to befitted giving people a way to access them again, and so swiping over to the right of the main experience gets you the archive. It also made us focus for the first time on iPads, which are just about 10% of our active user base for the app, but a lot more important when you're talking about AR, because it's just a much better experience for AR with the larger the screen. And you can see Apple itself is emphasizing this. That's our app behind in the background at a recent Apple event, where they view part of the potential of iPad as a device is in AR. Other news organizations are doing pretty interesting stuff as well. The New York Times did an experience around the Olympics. The Washington Post did an AR game also around the Winter Olympics. USA Today recently released an AR-only app to do your own rocket launches. You might conclude from these examples and my own that space and sports lend themselves pretty well to AR, which is true, but I think more generally what's happening here is it takes a lot of time and preparation to do a 3D model for a story for stories like this, and so ones that you can plan for months ahead of time are just more natural fits than breaking news. Of course, they're not all great experiences or experiments we've seen thus far. This is a cryptocurrency app displaying market data for cryptocurrencies in AR. With machine learning, if they somehow fit machine learning in here, we would have all of the buzzwords on our panel. But this is like just the right combination of useless and annoying, and I think a good example, a good reminder that there'll be plenty more QCats before we really find like the perfect use cases for AR in news.